I'm Megan.
I'm CJ.
And I'm Erica.
And this is the Her Podcast.
Due to the sensitive and triggering topics we discuss in this episode, we are putting a trigger warning here. Please listen with care and reach out to someone you trust if you need to talk. Okay, everybody, we are sitting down today with toxic relationship expert and women's coach, Anika Castaneda. Anika started her coaching business after her own personal struggles and experience of abuse in her former relationships, and she now helps women who need support navigating the trauma and healing of abuse and toxic relationships. This is such a powerful episode with a lot of in-depth conversation on her relationships, how she navigated them, the support she needed, and how her healing came. We chat with Anika about how she found herself in a cycle of abusive relationships starting at just the young age of 13, how her family had to move to escape the threats that she was experiencing, and how she began her healing journey and the impact her past had on her relationship with her now husband. Anika is so open with us and is working so hard to normalize conversations of abuse in order to help other women. Please take care while listening to this episode. You're looking gorgeous this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. You ladies look so good, and I love your setup. It looks so girly, and I love it.
Yes. Need a little bit of pink.
Yeah, I see that. It looks good on you guys, though.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm so excited to meet you. I have had the pleasure of perusing your Instagram and your website, and I signed up for an email or something. What did I sign up for? Yeah.
It was,
attachment style. Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, interesting. I think I'm anxious, but let's just.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet.
But
thank you.
For our listeners, we just want to give you the opportunity to tell your story in as much detail as you feel comfortable with. And we'll just kind of start from there.
Okay. So my story starts I'm 31 now, or I will be 31 this year. My story starts honestly when I was like 13 years old. That's when I found myself in my first abusive relationship. And, we had just moved from Dubai to Canada. It was an adjustment on its own. And life is very different here when you're used to a certain way of life. And I didn't have my mom around. So I was just trying to fill a void, which is how I found myself in this really abusive relationship. And because I was so young and I was pretty much a child, like now when I say 13, it's shocking to me that I was that young. But I think that really shaped the next 10 years of my life moving forward in terms of relationships. And I found myself in a very unhealthy pattern of repeating those same abusive cycles. And, I almost thankfully had a failed suicide attempt when I was 16. And that really just started like the process of, okay, like there is a mental health diagnosis here. We are talking about clinical depression. We are talking about anxiety. We are talking about PTSD. And I was kind of sick and tired of being told that like, this is just something I have to live with. And like, my life will never be anything more than what it is. Anyway, fast forward to me being 23. I was tired and I took things back into my own hands. And I said, I'm going to change my relationship pattern and cycle, because that was like the biggest thing for me. That was where I found the most amounts of trauma, and I had to really heal from that. And so I stepped away, did a lot of soul searching, a lot of connecting to myself, to my faith. I am Christian, and just slowly getting back to like a baseline of like what I wanted for my life moving forward. And at that same time is when I met my now husband, and well, now I'm 31, and that's where we're at. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you just like glazed over that, which is like so great, like just fast forward so quickly through your life. Yeah. I'm like, I'd love to circle back to when you were 13 and when you were 16, and what an abusive relationship looked like for you. What was actually going on in your life, what was happening. And I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
So when I was 13, I mean, because, my parents decided like it was better for one parent to bring kids here. We had a long distance relationship, if you will, with my mom. And, I'm the eldest child. I'm going through like women things. I didn't have a mom around. Like, it was just not easy for me to just really have someone there that I could trust. And I had to raise my younger siblings. So I think like that's how I found myself like, oh, this guy is giving me attention, because again, attention equated love at that time. Oh, this guy's giving me attention. Let's reciprocate. And I think it was like 3 months in is when the first time he slapped me. We got to put a trigger warning here, but the first time he slapped me, I remember thinking that couldn't have just happened. Like, your ears are ringing and the physical sensations are there. Everything you're experiencing physically is there, but your brain is going, that can't be real. Like, what just happened can actually have happened. And I think because I almost denied that it happened, I just pretended like, no, it couldn't have been what I thought it was. Like, maybe I was just like assuming this behavior. No, it was really that. And so it really progressed from there, and it turned from physical abuse to mental abuse and sexual abuse. And I think I was just too scared to leave, and I didn't really know what to do. And he would call my house very late at night and say to my parents, I'm going to pour acid on your daughter's face. Like, this is what's going to happen, watch your back. Like just ridiculous things that I would never wish on my worst enemy were said. And my parents thinking, what is even going on? Because in the Indian culture, it's very like relationships, they don't want you to be in a relationship and then they just want you to get married. Like, there's no in between. Like, dating to them is like what is dating? So anyway, like, to accept that like your daughter was in this situation, I'm sure was very hard for them. And there's a lot of shame in the community. And so it was never like, let's go report this to the police, let's do something about it. It was, let's move cities and protect our child. So they honestly did the best they could. And I remember thinking, like, we just moved from Dubai and now we're moving in again. I'm trying to make friends. You're going through so many changes as a teenager or early teenager. It was a big adjustment. And so when I made a move, I escaped one toxic relationship and found myself in another, because it didn't matter where I was, who I was, and what I was accepting was the same from who I was in one city to the next. That didn't change.
Well, and do you find, I personally have never been in an abusive relationship, so I just want to acknowledge that. And this is why I'm asking open questions from a curious perspective. But from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like, if someone was listening and something was happening in their relationship that they in your intuition, you feel is off. Yeah. Was it common in the beginning for you to question yourself? Like, am I crazy? Did this actually happen? What did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve this? What was your sort of like, what was your thought pattern that went through your mind? So if people are listening and they're like, I'm going through something like this, maybe they can identify themselves.
Yeah. So you're 100% like, I will say trusting your intuition or your gut when you've been through so many circumstances where your gut has let you down is a really hard thing to do. And so because I was used to a childhood where physical discipline was a norm, I accepted that when my boyfriend put his hands on me in a very inappropriate, unsafe way, well, that was okay because it was still love. Like, he showed me love in the morning. And so if he slapped me and physically and sexually abused me in the evening, well, that's okay because I still got something. So like, it was literally the tiny breadcrumbs that you really accept. And so that's why you question yourself and go, well, there's no way that this person hates me or will continue to hurt me. And you gaslight yourself into believing that like this behavior is okay because you're so used to the gaslighting in that environment. And again, if you're not a whole person and you don't have an identity, what you will allow and won't allow, you'll just take whatever you can get because it makes you feel something, even if the something is not a good something.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're just hitting the nail right on the head. And I'm curious then, at what point did you realize you were in an abusive relationship?
Like an aha moment. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think because it's like anything that you see, right? Like if you're in it, it's really your perception is skewed. But when you're on the outside looking in, you're like, wow, this is so wrong. And I can't believe this is going on. And for me, I definitely had an aha moment. So I don't want to say gentleman because it wasn't a gentleman, but the person I was with at that time who was just not a good person. His brother was the exact same. Sweetest parents. So I'm always curious as to how like some siblings turned out and the parents were compared to like how the two brothers were. And the older brother was very abusive to his girlfriend. And so when I went to meet the family and I saw her, she had these like carvings on her chest, and it was his name carved into her chest, which was apparently burnt over, because I think if you have a scar and you burn over a fresh scar, it like leaves a permanent scar. Anyway, it was just like not a good situation. And I remember looking at her thinking, is this going to be me in 6 years, in 7 years? Like, am I going to be this trapped with 2 kids? I don't know how to leave. Like, is this going to be how I feel? Because obviously I don't want to say anyone is trapped. You still have a choice to make, but it's a harder choice to make when you're so tied and committed to my children, my kids, or my partner, their family. Like, it's just so many moving parts at that time, right? So I think that was the moment I realized, like, I gotta do something to get out. And so I slowly started to accept that what was happening to me was abusive. And it's not that I left right away. It took me some time because I was scared of what would happen to me. And I did it over the phone. And, you know, I think my parents moved us shortly after. And so I was able to escape really quickly. But had it not been for things moving so fast, I probably would have said like, no, that couldn't have been it. Maybe I should go back. Maybe this, maybe that. So
when did you start telling people what was going on? Like, when did you go to your parents and say, this is what's happening? Or did they catch on themselves and come to you? I'm curious how that unfolded.
So because I was 13 and the relationship with my parents is, I love my parents, but it's not like a very close, I'm not going to tell you everything. Like, even now it's very like, I tread carefully, but I tread carefully with everybody. So it's a little bit different. My parents never, like, they knew something was wrong, obviously, with the calls and the threats made over the phone. But I think they were so scared and they didn't really want to ask me, and I didn't really want to talk about it. So we just said, like, there's a man making a threat. Let's just deal with the threat, as opposed to like, where is this threat coming from? What's the root? So we never had that conversation until I think it was 2017. I had a breakdown. And that's the moment that I shared with my mom that like, this is what had happened when I was 13, these are the things, et cetera, et cetera. So even after my suicide attempt, we never talked about it. I never said anything. There was one friend who shared the bus with me to and from school. She was the only person I ever told, but we were 13. Like, there was no way I was telling her. And if I was like, oh, he did that and he apologized, she's going to take what I'm saying and run with it, right? Because it's a lot to accept. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to help someone. But aside from that one girl, no one.
Wow.
Yeah. I just lived with it alone.
That's a lot to internalize as such a young person. I'm also curious, the age of the boyfriend, was he older than you or was he the same age as you?
He was a year and a half older than me. Okay. So also a child, but I think in this city that we lived in with a lot of like lower income households at that time, and his brother being that, you're just trying to, essentially it was his ego saying, I want to, you know, be cool with my brother, so this is how I'm going to be. So I think we were both years ahead of our age. I was trying to mature with my family, raising my siblings, etc. Because if I think about it as a 30-year-old woman, to think a 13 and 14-year-old doing this, it seems just not real.
So then you moved when you were 13. Your parents were like, Kate, we got to get you out of this situation. Did you move a second time after that second relationship when you were 16? Or like, how quickly, even in that relationship, did you realize you had just gotten right back into the same patterns?
So I moved when I was 13, and then I found myself in like a variety of relationships, moving on. So they never were like longer than, let's say, a year, 2 years, maybe. But because they weren't physically abusive relationships moving forward, it was like narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse. It wasn't as clear to me that this is what was still happening. I'm like, oh, maybe like, because if you're not beating me, then it can't, like, I was comparing it to someone that was already so bad that my like scale was completely messed up. And we only moved the one time, we moved the one city. And I think thankfully, because it wasn't like a physically life-threatening environment moving forward, I didn't have to make another move. But the relationships were just subtle abuse, if you will, compared to like what I had experienced.
Well, and I'm like, can you give us examples of what narcissistic abuse and emotional abuse actually looks like? Because I think because it's so up here, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? And hard to necessarily describe. Like, obviously now that you've done the work and you know, and you understand, like, what does that physically look like for you in your relationship? And how could we identify it as well if it's going on in relationships that we're a part of?
So because I didn't trust myself and the decisions I made, or like what I had seen and like what I was experiencing and calling it out, because I didn't trust myself. The reason the narcissistic abuse went kind of missed for so long is because I just allowed them to tell me who I was, right? And so a lot of it, for example, a specific individual, he was unfaithful, and every time something came up that made me question his loyalty, and it was like proof, like clearly written out, like you're cheating on me, and I would say something, it was like, oh, you're betraying my trust, and you are like, out of everything I'm doing for you and all that I'm giving you, like, I can't believe that you would doubt my loyalty. And so you're still questioning everything about yourself. And so narcissistic abuse is like when they're really trying to break you down so small and then reconstruct you into like what role they want you to play in their life. And so like they isolate you from your friends. They tell you like everything that you are is not good enough. They make you question your own reality. Like all of those things put together in one environment constantly is like narcissistic. And then an emotional abuse would be like if they're, constantly telling you your needs aren't enough, but like in a very demeaning tone, right? Like it's sometimes if someone is anxious or avoidant, they can say like, oh, your needs are too much. But if someone is telling you your needs are too much and also like you need to change them and adjust them and then degrade you for them, that's definitely levels of abuse.
Well, and I've heard before, I've listened to a couple podcasts on this before, and they talk about love bombing. And they talk about a lot of times abusive relationships typically start with like serious love bombing, because it's almost like and I want to acknowledge that abuse can, I mean, we're talking with you, but abuse can obviously be both sides, female and male, but I'm going to talk from my perspective, which is like a Prince Charming effect, right? Like this guy comes in and he's so incredible and you just can't believe how much he loves you. And it's this love bombing that kind of, I feel like makes all your guards just drop. Right. And you're almost like not ready for what's coming next. In a way, they're kind of like, like you just said, it's like building you up, bringing you down, remodeling you.
And they do that because that's how they keep you there for so long, right? Like people always ask, like, how do you enter into an abusive relationships? Why don't just see this relationship real and go, it's going to be abusive, let me enter. It's like, yes, absolutely. They love bomb you. They get you somehow. That's their trap. And then once they've got you in the spider web, it's really hard to get out of it because you're always trying to go back to that one day that you had a really good day and he was a great person. You're always trying to say like, okay, the gaslighting and the like degrading talks and talking about my weight and shaming me and doing all these things. Okay, well, that's only today, but tomorrow he's going to be the guy that I know he can be, because now they're trying to show you like there could be this potential, and then you start dating for that potential that you think they're going to serve, when in reality it's a completely different game.
So you mentioned, I've seen in your post that you say that you were addicted to chaos previously. And so now obviously I'm assuming you've come out of that and you're in a healthy space. So I'd love to know what that looked like for you and how you really started to begin to work through some of that trauma that you've had and begin to heal.
So the addicting to chaos is like the truest thing I have ever said, and like the hardest thing I had to accept, because it's like, wait, I could also be bringing just as many problems into my situation. And I think I only really noticed that with my husband, with Robert. When we met the first 2 years, it was that same like Prince Charming effect. And I'm like, I'm not going to fall for this again. Like, this is ridiculous. And so because I was so fearful, I mean, at the end of the day, love is a risk, and you're either willing to take it or you're not willing to take it. As hard as that is to say, and as much as you have gone through, that is reality, right? Like there's never a guarantee in your love life. So with him, because it was so smooth and we were getting along really well and things were moving really fast, I would pick at and fight about the little things. And I would never really get a reaction because it takes a lot to get him upset. He's very calm, and I would do things even though I knew that they were unhealthy, even though I knew that, like, this is just, I'm creating tension for no reason. And my anger took the best of, or got the best of me. And I remember like taking my laptop and like smashing it on the ground, just like, I was just so angry. And because I wouldn't get a reaction out of like just a simple, like picking at something or nagging about something, I would take it to the extremes. And we went through like a 6-month period where it was like smashing laptops and like punching walls and like just not good. And for him, he was like, what is even happening right now? Like, things are really good. There's really no reason for it to be to this level of like upset. Like, there has to be something underlying. And even though he really tried to see me for like the fact that it was a front, I just pushed him away even further. And we broke up for a 2-month period. And I think in those 2 months, I realized like, okay, what was I really upset about? And I was really upset that like I was finally with someone and I was telling myself that I didn't deserve this person. And so I was trying to end it before it ended me, because I was tired. I was like, I'm not entering another relationship and it's just going to be a waste of time. Let's just end it before he does. So yeah.
Hello, everybody. It's Erica. So as you probably know by now, I'm a happy mom of 3 to a boy, girl, boy situation. They're amazing. I love them. Maybe they'll hear this. Hi, guys. Something we've noticed with our youngest, though, is his speech. He is so sweet, and people are often saying how cute he sounds. But we've noticed that he has a bit of a lisp going on. And while we know it's adorable right now, we want him to be set up for the future so that people can actually understand him as he heads into kindergarten. This is where It's a Speech thing comes in. It was a no-brainer for me that I was going to call this crew to help me with Theo's speech. It's a Speech thing is owned by Kirsten Cito, who takes a fun and empowering approach to speech language pathology and offers support in a way that is easily accessible, which is so freaking important. It's a Speech thing offers a customized solution for children and adults who need support with speech, language, and communication. I love that they take a family-centered approach and include the parents so we can truly support our children with implementing new skills at home. At the end of every session, Kirsten and I always have a little debrief to go over how Nick and I can actually support our son at home. I love this because we don't just have to rely on our sessions every single time. We can take that homework and develop Theo as we go. What we found really amazing is the children's speech therapy is geared to engage children of all ages through play-based interactions. So Theo is always having fun and learning at the same time. I swear the first thing he says when we either go into the room or we pop up on Zoom is, "Can we play a game?" Kirsten will also work in collaboration with the other professionals involved in your child's life to really provide a comprehensive and integrated approach to speech and language development across all settings. Talk about community, you guys. It's a Speech thing sessions can be booked in person in both Saskatoon and Calgary and throughout all of Saskatchewan and Alberta through online sessions. That's actually what we typically do because we live outside of the city and it's been so easy to do. Head to itsaspeechthing.com. That's ITSASPEECHTHING, spelt exactly as it sounds, .com. To learn more and get a free consultation, yes, free consultation with Kirsten, follow along on Instagram at It's a Speech Thing Inc. We're linking it all in the show notes for you guys so you can easily find it and connect. And did he know about, like, had you shared with him your previous relationships? Like, was he aware and kind of understood that you were coming from a place of hurt?
Yeah, absolutely. He knew about everything literally from our first date. I don't know what it was about him. It was just such a comfortable environment. I remember sitting at like the movie theaters and talking for 4 hours about like our childhood. He had been in a, almost killed him, car accident. And like, we just had so much that it was vulnerable from day one and it was beautiful from day one. And so he knew my past and he knew my anxiety. He knew I had depressive moments and he supported my anxiety like without running away. And that for me was the biggest step, because in the past, every relationship I was with or every relationship I was in, the person always made me feel terrible for having anxiety and would always do these things that made me feel like something was wrong with me. And when he accepted me and held me and like allowed our breaths to sink, like those were moments that solidified our relationship. And when it continued in the way, like he was very patient, but I think I was just annoyed that he was so patient and annoyed that like, why are you here? Like, I don't deserve you. So let's create a mess. And, but I think it's also hard for the other person on the receiving end to always take, like, you're kicking them constantly. So I think it was his human, like, in order to protect himself also, he's like, we need to, you know, take a step back and breathe, because like, I'm not helping and I don't want to make it worse. So yeah.
Well, and there's a bit of, I think, testing that happens when you've exited a relationship and now you're in a new one, and you're kind of, I think, testing to see, you know, what will this look like? What are the limit? You know, is this real? And so I'm not surprised that a go-to would be to kind of push those boundaries a little bit.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the testing is like, I'm going to test myself to see how much can I do to push you. And I'm testing you to see how much it is you're going to take. And that's really not how love is. That's not what a healthy relationship looks like, because I just think that's so disrespectful that I mean, I could say that because I did that and I was testing him. And at some point, I guess I failed us in a way. And I'm sure he feels like we got back together and we talked about that we had failed each other because we were testing each other. And because I was really trying to see, like, how can this person, what are their conflict resolution skills? Because if I'm going to be this wild, then are you going to physically hurt me? But he had never given me a reason to say that or to doubt that. So why did I do those things to make him question, or to make me question our relationship and our connection? So it was not a good time, but we made it through. So anyway, yeah.
I'm curious because at the beginning, when you kind of gave us a little overview, you kind of alluded to the fact that you began the healing process. Was it at the same time that you met your husband? Was that kind of like aligned when you really began your healing process?
I had started like kind of uprooting all of the trauma from the past when we had met. Like, I'd already started that process, but I guess I didn't take it as seriously, or I was just dealing with like, these are the physical things that have happened in my past. How can I change moving forward? I think that had happened only when we had broken up and taken that time, because it forced me to look in the mirror and say, girl, there's a really healthy man. Like, the Lord sent you a man, you know, do you really want to be testing this? And do you really want to be putting yourself through that? And I think those, like the two, because I mean, I was doing it for 2 years, and then suddenly in 2 months, the amount of like growth I had made, and not that it was the end of the growth, but like, you really are forced to deal with it now because, or something may pass you by. And so I think that forced me to kind of speed up the process and, okay, this has happened. How can I like deal with it moving forward?
Well, and Megan touched on in the beginning that she downloaded and signed it up for an email talking about attachment styles. But I'm like, you know, I think I would love to hear you expand on just a brief overview of what the attachment styles are and what they could look like, and maybe even what one you are, if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. Totally.
So that we can hear some of your personal experience with that.
Totally. So there are two groups, so an insecure attachment or a secure attachment. Insecure attachments are your anxious attachment, and then two types of avoidant. So you have your fearful avoidant and your dismissive avoidant. I definitely resonate with the anxious attachment. I always think something's going to go wrong. And I think that's also has to do with the fact that I have anxiety in general. So you start to question everything. Okay, like, he hasn't texted me back. Is he cheating on me? What is he doing? Why isn't he responding? Blow up his phone, send 10 text messages instead of just the one, and leave it. So that's your anxious attachment. That was me for a long time. I'm trying to work through it. There's still moments that I slip, but you know, it's about being human. So it's okay. And then you've got your avoidant. So you're fearful and you're dismissive. And it's really hard when an anxious and an avoidant are dating, because obviously an avoidant is just going to avoid it at all costs, either from fear of getting let down and being hurt and feeling like betrayal again, or they're dismissive, where they're just like, I don't need you, because they think, like, avoidants think that I have to do it all myself and I can't trust someone else to help me or be there for me. And we're created for connection as humans. That's why we're created. And avoidance kind of constantly forget that you're allowed to have connection and still be independent. So they really try to hold on to that. And if they're dismissive avoidance, it can lead to forms of abuse. Yes.
I was like, I don't want to interrupt you. Okay. So I just want to clarify, as you go through the other ones, does everybody have like a good, I don't want to say good and a bad, but like how did you word it?
Secure and
a secure and insecure.
Secure and insecure.
Everybody has like one of each, or is someone like just in the insecure and just in the secure?
So you can have moments where like you're feeling overly insecure, and it also depends on like who you're with and like how, because your relationship that you're in affects you. And some people believe that like you should work on healing your attachment style before stepping into a relationship. I don't necessarily believe in that, because my relationship experience was very different. Like I was an insecure attachment. I had an anxious attachment, and my husband is fairly secure. So his security helped me be secure because he allowed space for me to be anxious without thinking it had anything to do with him, right? Because a secure attachment style can hold space for you and space for them without thinking that one has to do with the other. Like they're respectful that like you're processing and dealing with emotions your own way, but they have their own identity and they're secure in that. So it's easier for them, it's slightly easier for them to give you the space to be anxious while also allowing you to get to a place of from insecure to secure, because obviously the end goal is to move in the secure direction.
Well, and I can completely identify with that, because I think when I started my relationship with my husband, like I would say in some areas, like my relationship with my husband healed me. Right. Yeah. And so I think that I was absolutely an anxious and insecure style attachment when I first started with him. And then through his security and just like loving and steadiness, like I am now, I don't know what the other side is, the whatever secure side, or maybe we're gonna get into that, but I'm like, I've transitioned. So I identify with you in saying that sometimes like a good relationship can help heal you through that, even before you feeling it on your own, and probably both can happen, right?
Absolutely. Because if the cut is still fresh and you're in another relationship with another insecure attachment, it could make that cut reopen and rebleed, right? Whereas if you're a fresh cut and you're feeling anxious or feeling avoidant, whatever the case may be, whichever attachment style you identify with, your secure attachment will allow the time for that cut to then turn into a scab and kind of heal, right? Because they're not adding more pressure to the cut and reopening that wound. They're allowing you to process that wound because they realize that that's needed. But they're not making it worse, right? So that's why it helps. I don't think it's their responsibility to get you to a place of secure attachment, because it's at the end of the day, it's all within your control and within your capacity and capabilities and what you're willing to do. So,
okay, do we cover them all?
I want to hear the secure ones.
But I have a question before we move to the secure ones. Sorry. Can you be anxious and avoidant? Like, can you be too? I'm like, I think
totally.
I'm both.
Yes, totally.
Double negative.
The double negative over here
is.
Absolutely. You can be multiple, right? It's just you either may lean towards one more than the other, but you could definitely, you could be like a 51 and a 49. Absolutely. You can have moments where you're feeling anxious and moments where you're like, I don't want to deal with this, and be avoided, right? So
the girls are like, yeah, that's you in a nutshell. Okay, great. Now let's hear about the ones we want to move into.
Yeah.
And clearly get some help going.
Let's do this.
So the secure attachment is just the one, right? So it's the anxious and the avoidance are in the insecure attachment, and then the secure attachment is where you want to get to. So the secure attachment is just one; it's not a group, and that's where you feel like you are a separate identity to your partner. Everything is not attached to them. Their behaviors or lack thereof, and their commitment, nothing is affecting you. You're accepting, okay, this is where you're at and this is where I'm at. So like, whereas an anxious attachment, if you're not texting me back as fast as I want you to text back, I'm going to create a story in my mind and then make all the reasons of the story why I should be consistently be anxious. Or in an avoidance situation, I've texted you, you haven't responded. So now I'm going to stonewall you. I'm going to block you out because I want to have the upper hand. Whereas a secure attachment can say, like, I've texted you, and when and if you respond is when and if you respond. And if you don't respond, if we're in the early dating phase and you don't respond, okay, that's fine. That was a sign in itself. And I would maybe check in once. And if I notice that like you really don't want to be here, then I can just move on. Like there's no like being in this relationship doesn't make me or break me. It's just adding to my life. So yeah, that's kind of where we all want to be.
Yes. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You I just thought of this when you were just speaking about your story, and you explained that you're Indian and the culture, wouldn't have wanted you to your parents wouldn't have like openly probably gone to their friends and been like, our kid is going through this. Like, how do we like help her? So I'm curious on how vocal you've been on social media about, your story and really advocating for healthy relationships and how to just everything you're doing on your social media page. Have your parents like been okay with that? Has your cultural community like seen it and been okay with it? I'm really curious on that dynamic.
That's such a great question, because I think like in the Indian community, it's so and especially in the Indian like Christian community, there's so much extra shame with it. Like, oh, it's about your faith, but it's also about your culture. I post what my heart is calling me to do. I'm posting on that. Like, I'm sorry if you don't like it, that's on you. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable, like ask yourself why you're feeling uncomfortable, right? Like that's kind of what I do it that way. In the beginning, it was hard. Like I would kind of sugarcoat things, or I would not be authentically myself, not talk about my story. And so I would like really only talk about parts of my story. I wouldn't explain all the abuse I'd experienced, or I would just make it as PG as I could. And even with that, I remember when my mom first came on my socials, and I love my mom, but she said, are you sure you want to be talking about this? Like it may create some drama. I said, good, let it create some drama. Let it wake some people up. Let's talk about it and accept it, because me being quiet and not talking about what is first of all, is my right to talk about my story. So I'm going to do that. And also if it can help one person and if it could save one person's life, that is what I'm going to do. And so you can either be here and watch it unfold and be part of it, or you can, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I respect that, but I am not going to change. And that's a boundary that you need to set of whether you want to be on my socials or not.
Hey everybody, Erica here to tell you about a luxury resale company that I'm obsessed with, Working Girls Boutique. I got introduced to them probably about a year ago and have been following it along and obsessing over all of their items ever since. You guys know I'm a sucker for a good bag and actually bought my first luxury handbag last year after crushing some amazing goals, and it was the perfect way to celebrate. Working Girls Boutique offers a stunning selection of gently loved luxury handbags and a safe, reliable, secure, reputable way to purchase, which is so important when making such a significant purchase. They have a strong commitment to authenticity and choose carefully curated pieces in excellent condition, including Prada, YSL, Chanel, and my favorite, Louis Vuitton. Ensuring authenticity of luxury items is no joke, and Working Girls Boutique prides themselves on thoroughly checking every item they choose. Trust me when I say I've spent my time looking through different brands and businesses that claim to do this, and Working Girls Boutique is the only business I would purchase from. They also offer flexible payment plans so you can secure your dream bag without breaking the bank. Plus, Working Girls gave us an exclusive discount code for you. Use code HER50 to save $50 off your purchase. You have to go look at the selection they currently have in stock. They have tons on their Instagram, and that's where I always see the new arrivals, but they also have a website with everything that is ready to go. I was just checking out a gorgeous classic Louis Vuitton Keepall, a stunning Chanel 19 bag with two-tone hardware that I absolutely love, and yes, I've sent screenshots to Nick because I'm always giving him gift ideas. Find details on the newest designer additions on Instagram at Working Girls Boutique, all one word, and head to their website, wgboutique.com, to secure your dream bag. Don't forget to use the code HER50 for $50 off your purchase. That's HER50 for $50 off your purchase. And side note, if you do snag a bag, please send me a photo because I love talking about this.
With like aunts and uncles and stuff, no matter what I do, you're gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
Like no matter what I do, you're gonna talk about it. So let's just talk about something good. And at least if we're talking about, oh, Anika went through this stuff, then at least maybe the next time you'll notice it with someone else, and then we can do something about it and not just be quiet about it. So
and I have like a personal question, and maybe people out there as well. If you're have a friend, a family member, someone in your community who you think or is going through abuse or in an abusive relationship, I'm very curious on what your suggestion would be on how you could come alongside them. Like, what are things that you could do to assist in that situation? I've just experienced one person before in my life that comes to my mind that was very clearly an abusive relationship, would show up to work, black and blue, and say, oh, I tripped and fell down the stairs, or, it's something like that. Right. And it's just so hard to know how to support that person in the place that they're at. And so, from you obviously having walked through it, and then now like being an expert in this area, I'm curious what we can do to bring support.
It's really hard when you because the thing we want to do is we want to save them all, right? We want to help them all. We want to just go in there and like hug them and never let them go back into that house where they're falling down the stairs and getting all these bruises. Like, we never want to do that. And unfortunately, if we approach it with that like gusto and that aggressiveness, it can just push the other person away. And so I think we have to just tread carefully, and every person is different. Some people are just waiting for you to come and say like, listen, I know those bruises are not from you falling down the stairs. Like, what is really going on here? And they're just waiting for you to open the door and have that conversation. So you really have to play it by ear on this person. Some people, like for me, when people would say, I don't know if this is totally safe for you, or I don't know if this is a completely healthy relationship, I would then gaslight them and say, are you insane? Like, don't talk about my boyfriend this way. And because your loyalty still lies with that person, right? And so if they find that you're against that person, even if that person is abusing them, they could just cut you out. So I think the goal is to just be as present as possible and really meet them where they're at, because today they may shut you down and pretend like it is not happening or avoid it. And tomorrow, in this one moment, you could be there and that could change, and they could completely make a switch in their life. Or you could say one thing and they could reflect on it, and they can go back and say, I don't want to be in this relationship, right? But you absolutely have to meet them where they are, which is really sad.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, we can't make that choice for them, right? Yeah. And so we can come alongside them. So that was great advice.
Well, and I mean, again, speaking from experience, there's just so much shame. Yeah. Right. There's so much shame. And I think, when other people can see it, you're just like, don't look at it, or like, no, it's fine. And the shame, the internal shame that gets wrapped up, I think my experience was as a very strong female who, had a friend be like, what has happened here? Like, this is not you. Like, you would never like that moment, you almost feel this like identity of like, who am I? And now you're so embarrassed by it. And not even embarrassed, because I think embarrassed is different than shame. Like, shame is so deeply rooted. And I think that's, like you said, like you were like, I had to work on what was going on with me, but also people who find themselves in these situations are just like, the shame that comes with it is so heavy.
Yeah. Because it's like shame of like, what are you going to think of me? But also shame of like, what do I think of myself here? Right. Like, you're so broken down. You're so just weak and tired and drained and burnt out. Like, you're feeling all these things. And then on top of that, you're belittling yourself, because you're thinking like, how could I have let this happen? And so it's more like this shame that you are trying to protect. Like, you're already shaming yourself so much that you're just trying to protect yourself from external shame, because that's also hard, as when your internal shame like limit is passed. It's just not, there's no like one way or one answer on what one person needs. Like, a really strong person can say like, you know what, you're right. Like, what is going on with me? Like, this is not okay. Like, I'm going to get back to where I'm at. Or someone who was already really vulnerable, and now you're telling them, they're thinking like, I can't believe you would break me down even further and kick me while I'm down, and so I don't want to be friends with you anymore, right? Like, it could be two completely different outcomes. So I think just going along the journey with them and just being present, so that in that one moment they need you, that you're there, I think is the best that we can do. Because if we force someone to get out of something before they're ready to get out of it, they're just going to go back to it. And if they go back to it, it could just be worse. And we just, like, they have to make that decision, because they have to see the value in them leaving over the value in them staying, or lack of value in staying.
So you spoke about your healing and the process of, and I love how you say it's like an ongoing, because I think as humans, we're always going through it and we'll come over a hill and see the next hill in front of us. Yeah. And so I love that you said that, but I'm curious on what for you, was a really big tool that you used, or I don't know if you like read something or heard something or went to therapy, like something that for you was like, yep, that was very pivotal in my healing journey.
Therapy, I swear by. I think everybody, even if you've been through something or haven't been through something, should be in therapy. I just think it's just such a good resource. And I know it's sometimes not as easily accessible, and there are resources. So maybe I'll share them with you guys. But I think therapy is game changer because it allows you to process things with someone when they don't actually know you. They don't know you as a person outside of therapy, right? They just know your story. And so processing in that environment is very helpful. I am obsessed with self-help books. I know that's terrible because my therapist always says to me, you need to sometimes stop like
intellectualizing.
Thank you. All of your emotions. And I'm like, yes, I know, because I'm like, yeah, I read it in this book and I know I should be doing this. And like, I just think of like the logical things I should be doing and not like, as a human being, you can't just go from A to B as easily as you think you may, right? So the book that I read though, that changed a lot and put a lot into perspective from even before I had entered my first abusive relationship, was the book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
Oh,
and that
Add to cart.
Such a good book, such a good read, such an easy read. I love it. And I just think that book allows you to understand like the patterns of emotional acceptance and behaviors and intelligence that you start to mimic, really start from the ages of 0 to 5. 0 to 5 is where you learn attachment styles. 0 to 5 is where you learn how to have conflict resolution skills, where you learn like whether your emotions and your needs are important. Like you learn that before the age of 5. And then you take that and then that's your view of the world. And so if that is already skewed, like I had parents who weren't emotionally available, but they provided for me in every way that a parent provides for a child. But emotionally and on a way of me understanding love, it's not how I understand love. And it's not how I needed them to be there. And I think they just didn't know, like coming from their generations, because that's how they were raised. They're just doing the best they can. And I think a lot of immigrant parents raise you as survival is key and not anything else. Everything else is like subpar. Like you got to survive the world. And in order to survive the world, like financial, educational, like all those things come first. And so all the emotional and mental kind of bypasses, like to them, mental health is not a thing because they don't see it. So if you're not physically sick, they don't think of it as anything. And so a lot of my anxiety and insomnia and things that I was going through were never seen for what they are because they weren't the emotionally available parents I needed. So
I'm curious, and maybe do you have 2 younger siblings?
Yeah, I do. Oh my God, you know that.
Actually, side note, I was I was going to say, like, when we were getting ready to sit down, I was like, I don't even know how I like found Anika. I was like, I can't even remember. I was like, she was just like on my page or something, or I don't know, maybe like connected through like a reel or something. And then we started following her. I don't even know if it was Carousel or mine, but I was like, no, I really enjoy you and your content. So of course I know that. Do you see in your siblings, like you said, you were addicted to chaos. So do you see similar behaviors with your siblings because of like how you've spoken about your parents? Or was this more the parenting style you received and they received different parenting styles?
Absolutely. I believe that no 2 siblings have the same set of parents. And in my family dynamic and experience, 100% that's true. Like we have 3 siblings and we have 3 sets of parents raising us, because the way that they are with my brother is very different than the way that they are with my sister. Like my brother gets the, like, I'm the only son treatment. And, neither of us are like mama's boys or like a daddy's girl. We're not that, but we're also, it's clear that my mom, like, I feel like she favors my brother. And I always joke about that to her. I'm like, your son is your favorite kid. And she's like, no, that's not true. It's like, I don't know. We'll see. And I just say it because honestly, at this point, I've just accepted like what it is what it is. And I have to accept people for consistently for who they are. And my sister, she's very, my siblings are definitely way more quiet than I am. And I don't think they're addicted to chaos. I think if I was to call out their attachment styles, I think both of them are avoidance. Like both of them are fearful avoidance because I brought a lot of the chaos into the house. And so they just like chilled out, they were just the quiet ones in the corner. Whereas like I was loud and I thought I was way more grown than I actually was because I was raising them. And so like the way that I fought with my parents was everything was loud from me. And so they were just quiet. And I still see that in the way that they behave now. So
that's so interesting. That's such a good takeaway that every kid has like grows up with a different set of parents. I'm like, that like blows my mind and makes so much sense.
I'm literally like, cause we have 3 kids and I'm like, I'm like, which actually my friend and I were just having this conversation with her and they have 5 kids. And the oldest was like, that kid, the youngest gets away with like way more than I did. Yeah. She just had like a real conversation and was like, that's because like your behavior was different than theirs. Right. And it's like, yes, parents will act differently, but even your children in and of themselves are like so individualized that I'm like I used to say my eldest at 18 months, I could be like, you're on a timeout and stand him, in a chair. And he would just sit there. Like he was not moving. He was like, I'm in a timeout. And then my daughter came along and it like for even now for years, I'm like, I don't know how to like discipline this kid. Like she don't care about anything. Like our son, right? Our youngest, I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's a really good take. I'm going to tell that to my husband today.
Yeah. Well, and interesting too, because you come from a family of 4 siblings. Right?
Yeah. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. We could probably all speak to how different our parents parented us versus our siblings, but while we still have time, I would love to just touch on how you became somebody that women can go to help move through the abusive relationship and start to heal and kind of what that looks like.
So I feel like I almost fell into this. I just like at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember sitting like in prayer, and the way I always connect with the Lord through nature. And every time something like has happened in my life or like asked me to be a different person, it has always poured down rain. And I remember sitting in prayer and I remember asking him like, okay, this pandemic, whatever this may be, like, what am I doing at this time? And it started pouring down rain. And I remember hearing the word blog. And I had never thought about writing a blog. I like write in a journal. That's as far as it goes. Like, I was like, what is a blog? Like, who is going to write this? And I started blogging in the beginning of the pandemic. And I started connecting with women who said like, this is my story. And like, thank you so much for sharing. And I really appreciate this. And I feel so seen. And then I got a lot of questions of like, what did you do? How did you get to where you are? Or like, what is the next step? Like, this has happened, but how do I get to the next? And I think it was, I needed it. I needed that for my healing as much as they needed it for their healing. So I always say like the clients that I have served have helped me more than I have helped them, I'm sure, because they just bring so much, like it makes my heart so happy and fulfilled to know that like my story is not wasted. My pain is not wasted. I went through it because I have a voice. I am loud. I am like the girl that will talk about it. And like, I will argue with you about abuse and I will argue with you about toxic relationships. That voice and that power is for a reason. And I'm here to make that impact in these women's lives because we need that and we need more of it. And like, we need it every day because I can't save them all. And I just want to change the narrative for women who have experienced abusive relationships. So that's honestly, I just fell into this whole experience and it has been the most life-changing journey that I've been on. So,
well, and your content is so amazing. Like you guys, if you're listening,
Thanks,
like
guys.
you need to go follow Anika because you will have so many takeaways from watching her content. I was scrolling through it the other day and I had one other piece that I had pulled away that I'd love to pick your brain on, and then we will get close to close here. But scorekeeping and scorecards in relationships. I watched one of your reels.
Danger.
All of us. And I'm like, oh,
we just went through a renovation. Okay.
like not great timing.
There's not a scoreboard. There's like a clock on the wall and it like dings.
Back and forth.
Boxing match over here.
Yeah. No, I'd love for you to shed a little bit of light on that because the reel was so good and the information, and then we can build off of it.
So scorekeeping is like you think it's innocent and you think that like, oh, it's not going to do anything. I mean, listen, all relationships go through highs and lows. We have our moments, some more challenging than others. And that is genuinely life, because life is not ever going to be just like a straight line. Right. But it's when you keep the scorecard for like malicious intent, you're using it as like ammunition of like, let me think about all the things he did wrong and write this list out. And then the next time this is a completely irrelevant argument, I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to use it and be like, remember when you did this at, June 2nd, 1995, like you're thinking about all these things that like have nothing to do with anything. And I think that's when it creates a lot of trouble, because we are constantly expecting relationships. Like I'm doing 50% and you got to do 50%. Well, you're not always feeling 50%. You're not always feeling your 100% as a human to be donating 50% to your relationship. And so you have to accept that like some days you're working at 70 and you're going at 75 and your partner's doing the lesser and vice versa. And that is when you find that healthy balance, because as long as your relationship is functioning at 100% and obviously not you always doing 75%, then that's great. But if you're always doing the legwork and then your partner is just doing bare minimum, that's when you feel like you need to keep that. And then you need to understand that like, it's not just about this scorecard. It's about a deeper rooted issue, is that my partner is not as committed to this relationship and doing the things that we both need for the benefit of this dynamic. But when you keep that scorecard and just because you feel like it should be 50-50, that's the unhealthy part. Well, but it is natural.
I'm curious then. Okay. So like, obviously I can identify with keeping a scorecard. I think we all can. We have all done that. But I'm also like, what if you're moving away from keeping a scorecard, but your partner is not? Ooh. And your partner is constantly bringing up a scorecard? What would be your thoughts on how to handle that?
So I think I think communication is your foundation, right? Like if you have solid communication and conflict resolution skills, you can understand. If your partner is constantly keeping a scorecard, are they even aware that they're doing that? Or are they just doing it so they're just so used to it, it's now in their subconscious. They just remember everything. Like I have a pretty solid memory. So I remember everything. And sometimes I wish I didn't remember everything. But if I was to talk about, okay, well, you left the cabinet open and you left the lid on the counter and you left the coffee cup out and your socks were on the ground and like, do these things really matter? Right. But if I'm bringing them up, am I bringing them up because there's a deeper issue that I refuse to accept? And so I'm just trying to make it like, like if I'm bringing all these things up, is it because I feel like not good enough? And so I want you to feel like you're not doing enough? Or is it because you're not doing something else, but I don't want to focus on that because it's too heavy. So let me just focus on the fact that your socks are on the floor, right? Like why is your partner constantly bringing up the scorecard, and are they aware of it? That's understanding that first is the most important. If you've addressed that they are keeping a scorecard and talking about like, okay, this is how we should move forward, like having an open discussion of what's expected, and they make a change, great. If they don't make a change and you're constantly revisiting that conversation, then it's deeper. Like you have to like have a different conversation of like, what's going on in this relationship here,
Well, and I was going to say, like, I feel like probably the scorecard, it's very rarely about the scorecard. Like it's probably more about those other underlying needs that are not being met. Because to me, I'm like, if I were to bring up a scorecard of, let's use your example. So, like this wasn't clean and this wasn't clean and this wasn't clean. Probably the root of that is like, I don't feel like, I'm being probably cared for properly because this isn't happening around the home.
Exactly.
And a different discussion. And most people probably aren't, I don't want a blanket statement, but like emotionally aware enough to possibly understand that it's like not about the actual socks on the floor.
Exactly.
The feeling it actually brings in me.
Exactly. And like when you understand your love languages, for example, like if you're feeling neglected and your love languages are words of affirmation and your partner's just bringing you gifts, well, you don't want the gifts. You want them to say like, thank you for taking care of the house today, or like, thank you for taking care of the kids today. Thank you for my lunch. You're waiting for someone to just say thank you. And sometimes it's that, but if they're not doing that, you're now annoyed with them. So you're picking at all these things that are irrelevant to the situation.
I remember I'm still in therapy, but I was in a therapy session probably like 3 years ago, and it stuck out to me so much because my husband and I at the time, we were going through some stuff, and I remember being like, he doesn't, like, I was making comments like, I don't feel like he loves me anymore and this and that. And she very lovingly was like, you're looking through love with this lens. And she kind of like put blinders on. She's like, you can only see love through this, how you want to see love. And she's like, have you taken off the blinders and tried to see how else that love might be showing up in your life? And it made me be like, okay, like, what else is he doing? Because I think it should be this. Yeah. But he might be like, hey, I washed your car today and made sure it was full for you to go to the city. I'm like, that's love. Like, that's still love. It just isn't him walking in and being like, look how beautiful you are today, which is what we're over. But no, like, totally. Right? Yeah, you have to like take the blinders off and go, because mine and my husband's love languages are not always the same every day. Right? Like, we might need something different. So if I'm looking at it going, you didn't love me today, he's like, look at all this, like, look at what I did today. I did
all of these acts of service. I just didn't give you words of affirmation.
Yeah,
exactly. My husband will list it to me. I'll be like, you don't love me. And he's like, I did this and this. And I'll just be like, okay. Yeah. So now I just ask him, like, how did you love me today?
Aww.
But that's such a good question to ask.
It is.
But he knows, and he can identify like what he's done out of the act of love in his heart. Right. So sometimes I'm like, oh, that didn't look like love. But then when he's like, I did that lovingly, like I interrupted you in the middle of your work and came in and said, hi, you're beautiful, and I'm just like, get out of here. I'm working. He's like, my intention was to love you.
Yeah. That conversation with my therapist. And again, I'm not perfect at all, but it did make me step out and now be way more grateful for what some people might call the mundane things in marriage.
Oh, yes.
Right. Like when my husband actually, like, Nick washes my car and we'll fill it and I'll just go and it'll be like ready to go. And I'm like,
the best.
That is actually saving me time and stress this month. Like, that was actually love that he went and did. And it has made me have to be more vocal in my gratefulness for those things that I think in marriage and relationships we sometimes view as expectations of each other, right?
I love that.
And like, that's the truest thing, is that like love is not a feeling, right? Like, it's not like you're not just going to be like floating on clouds. Like, that's not it. Life is practical. You got to, like, the way they show up first, because you're building a life with this person. You're building a future with this person. And so if you're trying to get to a meeting or a job or a client and your husband washed your car and filled your gas up, he did that so you had a smooth start to your morning, right? Like, that's so much love in that. And I think now we're moving into a generation where like people understand attachment styles, they understand love languages, but our parents' generation didn't really have that. And we learned to love from that generation, which is really hard to then say like, okay, well, I need more than just this feeling to live off of, because the feeling goes away. Those butterflies, they go away. Like, that's not going to last. And people think, well, the butterflies aren't there, so like the love isn't there. Well, they showed up in the filling up the gas. They showed up in like popping in and saying like, you're beautiful today. Like, they're showing up in so many ways, but we want these grand gestures, and that's not it. Like, it's in the mundane, it's in the everyday. And I would rather have everyday, like, check-ins through the day and small pockets of peace and love and respect than like one grand gesture to some bougie restaurant once a year. Like, I would rather take the daily boring over the dramatics.
100%. So good. I mean, our time here is really coming to a close, which is so sad because you provided so much knowledge. Like, thank you so much for the educational pieces and tips and navigating healthy and toxic relationships, and even opening about your own journey in your own relationship. We normally at the end of every episode have a question that we ask, but I'd actually love to like flip it and change it a little bit, which I didn't tell you. That's okay. Put you on the spot, and that's okay. But my question is, we normally ask, and I do want to know this piece, what's the best advice you've ever received? But I would love to know, what's the best and worst relationship advice you've ever heard?
That's good.
And received.
Love that.
Okay, so we're doing best advice, and then
so let's start with what's the best relationship advice you've ever received or heard.
The best relationship advice that I've heard, and I don't even know where I heard it, and now tell my clients, is you can only love someone else and allow them to love you as much as you love yourself. So if you don't have that love, and if you don't have that self-respect, and if you are not connected with you first, because that's the most important relationship, you'll only let someone love you as far as that goes. Because if you think like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, no matter what they're doing to show you that, you won't even buy into it, because your mind is not there. So I think the amount that you love yourself and the relationship you have with yourself is the first most important relationship. And the others will become a reflection and a pattern of that. That's the best.
So good. So good.
Let's hear the
worst.
What's the worst?
I'm trying to think of like some cheesy like Pinterest crap I've seen before.
Yeah.
Or like things you see people share and you're like, that's bad relationship advice, that you see going around.
I think maybe like people just saying, like relationships are work and are hard. Yes, they are work and they are hard, but I don't think they need to be work and hard all the time. And I don't think you need to be doing all the work. Like people were like, oh, well, like my partner is just doing XYZ. So like, it's just a lot of work, making the effort and the time. Well, why aren't they meeting you halfway? Or like, if it's hard, why is it hard all year long? Like I think we then start to normalize it only being hard and only being work. They are work, they are hard, you have to be committed, but it has to be like both partners are doing that. When it's one-sided, it becomes really like, again, another toxic environment. So I think that's the worst.
Oh, okay. Well, let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can follow you, any resources that you want to specifically shout out as well. Feel free to do that now. But you guys, you need to go follow Anika if you are not.
Yes.
And definitely tag us in this episode with your takeaways, both of our accounts, things that you've learned.
Yes.
We'd love to hear it.
So you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube at Anika.Castaneda. So it's Castaneda, but it's Castaneda when you just write it out. It's Castaneda. So Anika Castaneda. And I do right now have a completely free guide for anyone to access. It's on the attachment styles, and it really shows you and allows you to accept like how you're showing up in your relationships, so that you can start to move from an insecure attachment to a secure attachment. So that guide is completely free. It's on my links, in my bio on Instagram, etc. So you can definitely get that there. And I will be accepting new clients soon. I had closed my books for quite a while for like a family reason. We just had, some illnesses in our family we had to get through. So now that things are finally feeling a little bit better, I'm opening my books soon. So I will be accepting new clients for private coaching and also group coaching. So yeah.
Amazing. You guys go get that freebie, go download it. And if you're interested, definitely reach out, Anika, to work with her, because that would be phenomenal. Thank you so much for
Thank you guys
with us. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Like, it was such a pleasure. I was so excited. I love that you guys have these honest, true, authentic, down to earth, like real conversations. They're so needed in the space, and it's just really nice to sit down with like not just one, but three incredible female entrepreneurs and women and moms and all the good things. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.
Bye.
Adios.